Thank you for joining the webinar today. So that you know, this webinar is recorded. I'm Izak Oosthuizen, founder and MD of Zhero. I'm also a best-selling author in cybersecurity. I have over 20 years IT experience, and my passion is to help organizations safeguarding themselves against cyber threats. I've worked with the likes of Giorgio Armani, WeWork, Energy UK, and Edmund de Rothschild. I'm also a member of the Entrepreneurs Organization in London, and Zhero provides end-to-end business cybersecurity and IT services for SMEs. Again, thank you for joining us. In today's webinar, we'll be looking at what is a supply chain attack, the reality of supply chain attacks, type of supply chain attacks, questions that you should ask your supplier, and then at the end we will have a Q&A. We will also make these slides and recording available at the end. What is a supply chain attack? A supply chain attack is a popular type of cyber attack in which businesses or many businesses are breached through IT vulnerabilities in their supply chain. How this has actually happened, it's caused when a supplier or vendor have inadequate cybersecurity strategies or ineffective data protection in place. The next 3 years clearly indicate a major increase predicted by the Global Attitude Survey done by CrowdStrike, and the European Union Cybersecurity Agency predicts at least a fourfold increase. 2021 showed the type of attacks increased by nearly 300%. I'm sure you would agree with me that it requires more attention. What type of attacks? There are 3 types of attacks: software supply chain, also the ransomware that's very popular. This is where hackers inject malicious code in software where vendors network to compromise the software before the vendor sends the software to the customers. Website builders, hackers target creative and digital agencies that build websites. When the agency is infected, so are all the websites that are actually set up and built. Third-party data stores. Some businesses outsource their data to third parties who store and process their data. Cyber criminals will enter the third-party data storage and use botnet to extract confidential information. Fraud experts say that information on consumer and business habits and practices is most valuable. In the next slide, we will actually look at an example of one of the most damaging software supply attacks in history. On the 2nd of July in 2021, Kaseya, a software supplier, they provide monitoring software to IT service providers, also known in this diagram as managed service providers, became a victim of a ransomware attack by a group called Revell. The present estimates believe that over 800 to 1,500 small medium enterprise companies experience a compromise through their IT supplier. It involved a ransom of over 70 million. The ransom was actually never paid out. Kaseya released a decryption key. So basically what happens is Revell gain access to Kaseya, in this scenario, the software supplier, and infiltrated and passed that malicious code onto the managed service provider or the IT service provider that has got multiple customers. And the end user, also the customer, actually received the malicious code, and the malicious software actually started encrypting some of the customer's data. So just imagine 1 times 1,000 times 1,000 equals 1 million. Imagine that one software supplier has 1,000 IT providers and each has 1,000 clients. If the software supplier gets infected with ransomware, 1 million IT systems could be taken down or be infected. You need to vet your supplier to make sure they have good cyber hygiene. What level of protection does your key suppliers have in place to ensure that you are secure? And it's not necessary that we always have to look at the largest suppliers, but we can look at small suppliers, our trusted advisors, people that we work with daily. Examples might be our accountants, our legal and recruitment agencies, our IT service providers, our CCTV or alarm providers, business consultants that helps us with strategy, SWOT analysis, or any other highly confidential information, or even contractors doing one type of special projects. We want to make sure these suppliers have good cyber hygiene with a few very basic concepts or practices that we just want to ensure they have in place. And we can also analyze and decide who do we want to actually review or bring under review. What type of data do they process on our behalf? Personal data, healthcare, credit card, bank information, and any other confidential information. So we will start up with some of the questions that we can ask them. So a question we will pose to our supplier: how do you store and share your passwords? At a minimum, you need to know that passwords are not on a post-it note in the office, but in a password manager must be used. A password manager is an application that functions as a centralized vault that allows users to store, generate, and manage their passwords for local applications or online services. These are one of the absolute minimums we need to ensure. How do they actually operate? Do they keep it on a post-it note or in a notepad or an Excel spreadsheet? Do they use multi-factor authentication? By employing or setting up multi-factor authentication, they can block 99% of hacks on their systems. And what you also need to know is, do they use any system where actually multi-factor authentication is not enabled? You want to understand and be aware of the systems they are using that might be posing a risk. These type of questions will also allow them to rethink their actual internal strategy, and if multi-factor authentication is not actually an option, are they using the correct software, and are there other providers they might be able to use that can actually enable multi-factor authentication? Or should they get a third-party software in to help them to actually access their line of business applications in a more secure manner? How do you manage your critical security updates? To protect your system from malicious attacks, you want your suppliers to run security updates when it's required. What antivirus solution are you using? Ensure it's a renowned product. Kaspersky, as an example, has recently been banned by the FCC. The National Cybersecurity Center has also warned organizations around using the software, as the actual software has been written currently in Russia, which is posing a potential national threat, not only to the organization. What is your internal password policy? You want to know your suppliers are changing their passwords on a regular basis and at least every 90 days. You also want to make sure they have other policies, like if somebody is attempting to log on or gain access to the systems, that the system will actually block access and disable the account. These are basics that you need to set up. You also want to make sure that passwords are not remembered, or people can't use previous passwords that they've used in the past. And we've actually recently helped a customer that by just starting implementing changing of password policies by and securing their network, and where they have actually been hacked in the past, and we just employ a password policy for them. What services are they actually using for changing these password policies? As we need to know what tools are they using, and that it's not just a box checking exercise and they're just answering yes and no, but you want to make sure that they're using a centralized solution that will actually automate the process. You also want to make sure that it's all the devices and assets that's actually logging onto the system will be managed by the centralized solution, and that it's not something that potentially might be forgotten. We have more technical terms that in the IT industry, and it's referred to a directory service. You ultimately want to ensure they're using a centralized directory service where the changing of passwords are a policy applied throughout the organization. Do you keep an inventory of all hardware and software? Why is this important? It's important to know that all the assets that they are using to service you as a customer and internally are compliant, and all the assets are updated, because it poses a risk to your systems. And do they have some sort of control over the software that's installed on the systems? And do they have an inventory? What is the allowed software and what is not allowed, and what poses a risk to the organization? How do you ensure your backups are working, monitored, and updated? This is the main reason why millions are paid out to ransomware demands, because backups are actually just not working. People are not monitoring the backups. People are not looking after the backups. And if you are in a scenario where you have a ransomware sort of demand, you have an option to restore your data instead of just paying the ransom. That's always an option. And most of the times where people end up paying the ransoms is because they actually never had a proper backup of their data. You need to know your suppliers are doing regular backup checks and actually test restores. Another question you want to ask them is, do you keep your backup stored in more than one location? What happens if the primary location or one of the locations is no longer available? It's a best practice, and this is also required by insurance organizations, that you have your backups in more than one location. It's no longer good enough just to have a backup offsite, but it needs to be at multiple locations. So you have your primary data, additional backup copy outside the office in a different location, and then another copy at another location. You also want to ensure that all your backups are encrypted. If the backups are not encrypted, it poses another risk and can easily be accessed. How do they regulate their administrative access? As a standard, users should never have administrative access to prevent accidental malicious software to be installed. You want to know they removed administrative rights to maximize security and maintain compliance. Do you have any internal cybersecurity awareness training? 30% of all violations are a result of employees just making simple mistakes and can be avoided by bringing awareness. Ask your suppliers how confident they are in their staff identifying, stopping an attack if they feel awareness is not required. Will your staff members be able to identify a phishing attack as an example? And then another question you want to ask them is, what cybersecurity tests do you do and how often do you do it? Assessments by third parties are absolutely key. Assessments are set to expose vulnerabilities so that your suppliers can improve in areas they lack. Many of you heard of Cyber Essentials, or those who have IT knowledge, CAS or CAS Plus. These are great benchmarks set by the UK government to safeguard systems in the UK. Thank you very much, and we're ready for questions and answers. Question quickly, if it's okay. It's Alison. Apology if I didn't pronounce it correctly. So, I mean, so if you're in a scenario where you have to pay 70 or £5 million versus you can restore from backup, because normally the reason why we would be paying for the backup or for the ransom is to get our data back. There are other problems also, or other sort of issues posed with if the data lands in the wrong person's hands, will be that obviously you can get penalized by the ICO, but the first sort of your first ambition would definitely be to get your data. And that's normally why people end up paying for the data, is because the backups have failed. Okay, any particular system to protect data such as F-Secure that you recommend? F-Secure is, sorry, Mike Deacon, I'm just wanted to check the question. F-Secure is the antivirus you are referring to? Okay. I know F-Secure is quite a good product, but we are using products like CrowdStrike is a very good product. Bitdefender is very good products. F-Secure is quite a renowned product. There are quite a few good products in the UK at the moment. Sophos antivirus. Trent is also very good. Okay. Fawn, thank you. What is the first step an organization should take if their security has been compromised and if they fear the client's private information is compromised? So it's quite difficult to say. What we've seen in the past with a ransomware is that the best we could do, we didn't know where the ransomware was actually coming from, and we had multiple workstations connected to a centralized server. And the best we could do at that time was to change the data to read only. And the ransomware actually, the ransomware sort of activity stopped. And we could assess, and we slowly actually, so we made it read only. That was the first quickest step, and then slowly started removing some of the workstations from the network. And we run a full scan, a full in-depth, a thorough antivirus scan, and make sure that all the security updates was applied. And at the time, also the antivirus was 100% up to date. In that scenario, it was somebody that had administrative rights on the local workstation and installed software that sort of override the actual antivirus. Thank you, Fawn. Warren James, how do you suggest we go about asking these questions to our suppliers, and how often does the process need to be repeated? I would suggest that this is possibly something you can start internally on a quarterly review, on a quarterly basis, and you just want to do these questions on a more due diligence basis, especially the suppliers working with confidential data. Okay, was there another question? Okay, Alison, thank you. Chris, how can we make sure that the suppliers are thoroughly vetted? The National Cybersecurity is actually providing quite up-to-date information on suppliers they have problems with. And I think a good place to start with is, I don't want to be biased about any country, is to actually just have a look at where the software was written and coded. Chris, how can we make sure that the suppliers are thoroughly vetted? The National Cybersecurity is actually providing quite up-to-date information on suppliers they have problems with. And I think a good place to start with is, I don't want to be biased about any country, is to actually just have a look at where the software was written and coded. Alison, can a proper password manager eliminate cyber attacks? No, it can't really, to be honest with you. It's a combination of things that you have to have in place, like as referred to in the slides. It's the password policies, multi-factor authentication, security updates, and many other things. But a password manager will basically just make sure that it's not on a post-it note somewhere, or it's not something that's easily accessible by a third party, and they can gain access, obviously, if they have your password. So it will definitely not stop all cybersecurity attacks. It's part of your strategy in your cybersecurity strategy. Should be one of them is like, we need to use a password manager internally to make sure that the way we are sharing passwords are in a healthy manner. If that's, yeah, thank you. Another thing in regards to passwords, sharing password, you should only be using a manager to share password. You should never share it on plain text or on a WhatsApp and say, this is my password for my Netflix or whatever it might be. If you're in a scenario where you have to do it, always use 2 different mediums. Simon, thank you for the question. So our recommendation is a minimum of every 90 days you have to change the passwords, especially on a corporate network, and that should be automated by a centralized directory service. That is, and also just coming back to the 90 days. The 90 days has been sort of that's been directed by the UK government, part of the Cyber Essentials plan, or recommended. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we will make these slides available to everybody and also the recording. Thank you.